않으면 적극적인 모습을 취해 못 본 척 했어. 신경 안 써. 네가 뭘 하던 간에 걸 이건 알아도 그 새낀 그냥 단지 네 몸을 원할 뿐.
Wyan sat on her bed, sketchbook open, lost in her thoughts as she shaded the edges of a blooming rose. The soft hum of her pencil was the only sound in her room, save for the occasional murmur of conversation from the other side of the wall, Jimin's side. He lived next door, separated from her by a thin layer of drywall and a word of difference. Wyan had been harboring a crush on Jimin for years. Every time she saw him, her heart would flutter, and her mind would fill with daydreams. He was everything she wasn't. Outgoing, confident, and the star of the university's dance club. She, on the other hand, was shy, artistic, and more comfortable blending into the background than standing out. Her best friend, Susie, plopped down beside her on the bed, breaking her trance. Wyan, seriously? You need to stop daydreaming about him and do something. Wyan blushed, quickly closing her sketchbook. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, please, Susie teased. You've had a crush on Jimin since forever. It's time you make a move. Before Wyan could protest, their other friends, Yuri and Diane, joined them, giggling mischievously. Diane, always the instigator, smirked. How about a dare? Something to finally get you noticed by him. Wyan's eyes widened. What kind of dare? Yuri grinned. We dare you to sneak into Jimin's house and bring back something of his, something he really cares about. Wyan's heart raced. The idea was, you're crazy? I could never. Come on, Wyan, Susie encouraged. It's just a little fun. Besides, you'll finally have an excuse to talk to him. Diane leaned in. Or are you too scared? Wyan's competitive side flared up. She knew it was a bad idea, but the thought of getting closer to Jimin, even if only through a silly dare, was tempting. Wyan spent the rest of the night convincing herself that this was a good idea. Her friends had all gone home, leaving her with the task ahead. She couldn't back out now. Her pride wouldn't allow it. But what could she take? It had to be something meaningful to Jimin, something that wouldn't be too easy to find. As she mulled it over, she remembered a conversation she'd overheard between Jimin and one of his friends. They'd been talking about a rare perfume bottle Jimin had found at a branded store, a collector's item he cherished. That was it, the perfume bottle. The thought of sneaking into Jimin's house terrified her, but there was also a thrill in the challenge. Maybe this was her chance to prove she wasn't just the quiet girl next door. Wyan did her homework, literally and figuratively. She learned Jimin's schedule, knowing he had dance practice late into the evening. After confirming he'd be out with his friends that night, she planned her move. Dressed in dark clothes, she waited until dusk before slipping out of her house. Her heart pounded in her chest as she approached Jimin's home, the cool night air doing little to calm her nerves. The window she chose was in the back, slightly ajar, a lucky break. She carefully slid it open and hoisted herself inside, landing softly on the carpeted floor. The house was eerily quiet, and Vian hesitated, her breath catching in her throat. She made her way through the house, her steps careful and silent. It felt wrong to be in someone else's space like this, but she pushed the guilt aside, reminding herself it was just a harmless dare. Vian found herself in Jimin's room, a place she'd only imagined before. It was surprisingly neat, with posters of his favorite K-pop idols on the walls, and a shelf lined with perfume bottles. And there, on his desk, was the perfume bottle. She reached for it, her fingers trembling slightly. As she picked it up, she couldn't help but glance around the room. She noticed little things, a sketchpad on his desk, a framed picture of him with what seemed like an younger sibling, and a guitar propped up in the corner. She felt a pang of guilt. Jimin was more than just the popular dancer. He had layers she hadn't considered. Just as Vian was about to leave, she heard the unmistakable sound of the front door opening. Panic surged through her as she realized Jimin was home early. She froze, clutching the perfume bottle, her mind racing with what to do. She heard footsteps approaching, and before she could think of a way to hide, the door to his room swung open. Jimin stood there, his eyes widening in surprise at the sight of her. "Vian?" he said, clearly confused. "What are you doing here?" Vian's face turned crimson. She had no choice but to confess. I'm sorry, Jimin. My friends dared me to come here and bring something of yours. I know it's stupid, but I thought it might be fun." Jimin stared at her for a moment, then burst into laughter. "You're serious? You broke into my house for a dare?" Vian's embarrassment deepened. "I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to invade your privacy. I'll go now." But as she turned to leave, Jimin's laughter faded, replaced by a more thoughtful expression. "Wait," he said, stepping closer. "You know, I've noticed you before. I just didn't think you'd ever do something like this." Vian bit her, feeling the weight of her confession pressing down on her. "I didn't do it just because of the dare. I've had a crush on you for a long time." Jimin looked genuinely surprised, his gaze softening. "Really? Why didn't you ever say anything?" "Because," Vian said, barely above a whisper, "you're out of my league. You're popular and I'm just me." Jimin chuckled softly. "You're not just anything, Ryan. And for the record, I think it's kind of cool that you're shy and artistic. It's different. Ryan looked up at him, her heart racing for a different reason now. She wasn't sure what was happening, but she knew she didn't want it to end. Jimin took the perfume bottle from her hands, but instead of being angry, he grinned. You've already gone through the trouble of breaking in. We might as well make the most of this. Ryan's eyes widened. What do you mean? Jimin shrugged, his smile turning a little mischievous. I don't know. Maybe we could, have some fun with this? Get to know each other better? Ryan's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what he was suggesting, but the idea of getting closer to him was too tempting to resist. What kind of fun? He looked at her, his gaze intense but playful. Maybe start with a conversation. I just found out the quiet girl next door broke into my house. That's not something that happens every day. They ended up sitting on his bed, talking about everything from their favorite movies to the pressures they each felt. Ryan with her art and Jimin with his dance. The more they talked, the more Ryan realized how much they had in common, and the more she felt a connection growing between them. Finally, after what felt like hours, Jimin leaned in, his voice soft. I've never had a girl sneak into my room before. It's kind of exciting. Ryan blushed, her heart pounding. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. You didn't? He murmured, his brushing against hers that was both gentle and electrifying. Ryan felt herself melt into it, the world around them fading away. When they finally pulled apart, Ryan was breathless. Jimin grinned, his hand still on her cheek. We should probably keep this between us, at least for now. Ryan nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and uncertainty. Yeah, that's probably a good idea. From that night on, Ryan and Jimin began meeting in secret, their relationship blossoming in the shadows. They'd sneak out after dark, meeting in the park or at each other's houses when no one was around. Their connection deepened with each encounter, laughter and shared secrets bringing them closer. But as much as Ryan enjoyed their time together, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. Being a secret had its thrill, but it also made her feel like she wasn't good enough to be seen with Jimin in the open. Ryan's friends, especially Susie, started noticing her sneaking around and missing their usual hangouts. Ryan, what's going on? Susie asked one afternoon at university. You've been acting so weird lately. Ryan fumbled for an excuse, but she could see the suspicion in Susie's eyes. I've just been busy, that's all. Busy with what? Diane pressed. Or should I say, with who? Ryan's stomach twisted. She knew she couldn't keep this up much longer, but she wasn't ready to tell them about Jimin. The tension between Ryan and her friends grew, and she could feel their curiosity intensifying. Meanwhile, Jimin's behavior had started to change as well. He was more cautious, more distant whenever they met, which only added to Ryan's unease. One afternoon, as Ryan walked down the university hallway, she spotted Irene, Jimin's ex-girlfriend, talking to a group of girls. Irene had always been a source of anxiety for Ryan, a popular, confident girl who still seemed to have a hold on Jimin. As Ryan passed by, she caught a snippet of their conversation. "I'm telling you, he's been acting weird lately. He's definitely hiding something," Irene said, her tone sharp with suspicion. Ryan's heart sank. Irene was onto something, and Ryan knew it wouldn't take long for her to figure out the truth. Her fears were confirmed when, later that day, Irene cornered her in the girls' restroom. "Hey Ryan," Irene said, her voice dripping with faint sweetness. "Can we talk?" Ryan forced a smile. "Sure, what's up?" Irene crossed her arms, leaning against the sink with a scrutinizing gaze. "I couldn't help but notice you've been spending a lot of time sneaking around lately. Anything you want to share?" Ryan's pulse quickened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, come on," Irene said, her eyes narrowing. "I'm not stupid. I know something's going on between you and Jimin." Ryan froze, the words catching in her throat. She wasn't ready for this confrontation, but Irene wasn't going to let her off the hook. "Look," Ryan started, "whatever you think is happening..." Irene, her off. "Spare me the excuses. Just admit it. You've been with Jimin behind everyone's back, haven't you?" Ryan's silence was all the confirmation Irene needed. "I knew it," Irene sneered. "What did you think? That you could steal him away from me and no one would notice? Please, Ryan, you're just a face to him. A distraction." The words stung, and Ryan's temper flared. "It's not like that, Irene. Jimin and I, we care about each other." Irene scoffed. "Care about each other? Don't kid yourself. You're just his little secret, nothing more. He's never going to take you seriously." Ryan felt the tears welling up, but she refused to let them fall. "You don't know anything about us." "Don't I?" Irene said, stepping closer. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're just a joke to him. And when he's done with you, he'll toss you aside like everyone else." The door to the restroom suddenly swung open, and both girls turned to see Jimin standing there, having overheard the entire conversation. His expression was a mix of shock and anger. "Ryan, is that really what you think?" Jimin asked, his voice tight with emotion. Ryan's breath caught in her throat. "Jimin, Irene jumped in, her voice. "She just admitted it, Jimin. She's been choosing you to boost her social status, to make herself feel better. That's not true, Wine cried, tears now spilling over. Jimin, I swear, I never. But Jimin's hurt expression her off. You should have told me how you were feeling, Wine. But instead, you let Irene get to you. Now I don't know what to believe. Wine took a step toward him, desperate to explain. I wasn't choosing you, Jimin. I care about you more than you know. But I didn't want to be just a secret anymore. I wanted more. Jimin's face hardened, and Wine could see the walls going up. I need some time to think, he said coldly, before turning and walking out of the restroom, leaving Wine feeling utterly broken. The days that followed were a blur of heartache and regret for Wine. She could barely focus on her university work, and her friends noticed her withdrawal. Susie, sensing that something was seriously wrong, finally cornered Wine in the art room one afternoon. Wine, what's going on? You look like you haven't slept in days, Susie said gently, sitting down next to her. Wine looked at her best friend, the tears she had been holding back for days finally breaking free. Susie, I messed everything up. Jimin and I, we were seeing each other in secret, and now it's all falling apart. Susie listened as Wine poured out the whole story, from the dare to the confrontation with Irene. When Wine finished, Susie sighed and hugged her tightly. Wine, I'm so sorry you've been going through this alone, Susie said softly. But you need to talk to Jimin if you really care about each other. You can't let Irene or anyone else get between you. But what if he doesn't forgive me? Wine whispered, her voice trembling. Then at least you'll know you tried, Susie said, her tone firm but compassionate. Love isn't easy, Wine. It's messy and complicated, but it's also worth fighting for. You owe it to yourself and to Jimin to be honest about your feelings. Wine knew Susie was right. She couldn't let things end like this. That evening, she mustered up the courage to go to Jimin's house, hoping he would be willing to listen. When Jimin opened the door and saw Wine standing there, his expression was guarded, but he stepped aside to let her in. They sat down in the living room, the silence heavy between them. Jimin, I'm sorry, Wine began, her voice shaking. I never meant to hurt you. I've been so scared of being a secret, of not being good enough for you, that I let those fears cloud everything else. But I want you to know that my feelings for you are real. I don't want to hide anymore. Jimin looked at her, his expression softening as he listened. Wine, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I know I didn't handle things well either. I never wanted you to feel like a secret, but I was so worried about what people would think about the rumors. I didn't realize how much that was hurting you. Wine reached for his hand, relief flooding through her when he didn't pull away. I don't care about the rumors, Jimin. I just want to be with you openly and honestly. But if you don't feel the same way, I understand. Jimin squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with regret. I was an idiot to let you think you weren't enough. The truth is, I care about you a lot, Ryan. And if you're willing to give this another chance, I want to be with you too. No more hiding. Ryan's heart soared at his words, and she threw her arms around him, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. I want that too, Jimin. I want us to be together, no matter what. As prom night approached, the buzz around university was all about who was going with whom. Ryan couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and nerves. When Jimin asked her to be his date, it felt like a dream come true. But she knew that going public with their relationship would draw attention, especially from Irene. The night of the prom, Ryan stood in front of her mirror, smoothing out the soft fabric of her dress. It was a deep blue, flowing gracefully to the floor, and she felt like she was stepping into a fairy tale. Susie had helped her with her hair and makeup, and now, as she looked at her reflection, Ryan barely recognized the girl staring back at her. You look amazing, Ryan, Susie said, smiling proudly. Jimin is going to lose his mind when he sees you. Ryan blushed, a smile tugging at her lips. I just hope tonight goes smoothly. When Jimin arrived to pick her up, dressed in a sharp black suit, his eyes widened as he took in her appearance. Wow, Ryan, you look beautiful. Thank you, Ryan said, her heart fluttering as she took his hand. You look pretty amazing yourself. They arrived at the prom together, hand in hand, and as they walked into the decorated gymnasium, heads turned and whispers spread through the crowd. Ryan could feel the eyes on them, but she held her head high, determined to enjoy the night with Jimin. As they danced together under the twinkling lights, Ryan felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. She was exactly where she wanted to be, with the person she cared about most. But she knew the night wouldn't be without its challenges. Sure enough, as the evening wore on, Irene made her move. She approached them on the dance floor, her expression cold and calculated. So, this is how it's going to be, Irene said, her voice with bitterness. You're really going public with this? Jimin tightened his grip on Ryan's hand, standing tall beside her. Yes, Irene, Ryan and I are together, and nothing you say is going to change that. Irene's eyes flashed with anger. You think you can just replace me with her? You're making a mistake, Jimin. She's not worth it. Ryan felt the sting of Irene's words, but before she could respond, Jimin spoke up, his voice firm. You're wrong, Irene. Ryan is worth everything to me. And if you can't accept that, then that's your problem, not ours. Irene looked between them, realizing that she had lost. With a final glare, she turned and walked away, leaving Ryan and Jimin alone on the dance floor. Ryan looked up at Jimin, her eyes shining with gratitude. Thank you, Jimin, for standing up for me. He smiled down at her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I'd stand up for you any day, Ryan. You're worth fighting for. As the music played on, they swayed together, lost in each other's embrace. Ryan knew that there would be more challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like everything was going to be okay. They shared a tender, sealing their commitment to each other. The future was uncertain, but they knew that as long as they faced it together, they could overcome anything.
주변의 온감이 내 정어린 시선을